The following episode profiles Mexican Mafia member Richie Ruiz, also known as Richie from Bakers, the original Tupac. Richard Ruiz was born on February 2nd, 1943, and was known on the streets of Bakersfield as Richie. Like many who make a career out of being a gang member, Richie was state raised and bounced from one California youth facility to the next. Considered the youngest of the Mexican Mafia original members, Richie was 14 years of age when he joined hands with the charter members at DVI in 1957 to create the Mexican Gang of Gangs. Imagine that, 14 years young. He paroled in the late 50s and hooked up on the outside with his homeboy Rudy Cheyenne Cadena. In 1959, Richie and Cheyenne became crime partners, committing a street homicide inside a Bakersfield dance hall. At the age of 16, he was one of the youngest inmates to walk the San Quentin prison yard and would reunite with some of the fellow Mexican Mafia members who had graduated from being youth offenders to the adult prisons inside the California Department of Corrections. It was at San Quentin that Richie and his homeboy Cheyenne from Bakers would connect with Güero Buff Flores, Kilroy from White Fence, Rup Soto from Venice, and many other first-wave members who had been recruited there in Quilmas or moved up from DVI. In 1960 or 61, Richie became part of the core group of Mexican Mafia convicts who established the formal death oath, organizational rules, and the term M was born. M was the Spanish phonetic pronunciation of the letter M for Mafia Mexicana or Mexican Mafia. Almost from day one, Richie began participating in multiple assaults and several murders while doing time at San Quentin in the service of his beloved prison criminal organization. In the early years, 60s and 70s, many of us were apprehended, locked up, suspected of, referred to the DA, and housed in long-term administrative segregation. But gaining a conviction was next to impossible because eyewitnesses were not willing to come forward against us. For a few decades, most of us lived a very charmed life. Richie was a proficient boxer at San Quentin and is shown here in the middle photo following a first-round knockout. He would excel in the ring, joining some of the other Joe Palookas of La Clica. Kilroy, Grumpy from Primera Flats, and Big D Garcia from San Fernando are all displayed in this graphic. Each would continue to excel in and out of the ring at San Quentin and FOLSOM prisons, joining other Mexican Mafia members who could skillfully handle themselves with their fists. Richie would incur the wrath of Sergeant Bill Hankins, who was the first IGI, institutional gang investigator, and considered a CDC legend. Hankins was so obsessed with busting Richie and getting him off the San Quentin main line, he even dedicated a chapter to him in his book he would later have published after he passed away. The book is titled Alpha Guard, The True Story of California's First Prison Gang Investigator by William Hankins. I will be profiling this book in an upcoming PFP episode for your edification. Not only did Hankins have a hard-on for Richie, he was hell-bent on pursuing members of the Mexican Mafia straight to the lockup units. I know, I was one of his victims. In 1971, at the Dual Vocational Institution in Tracy, Richie was now a 10-year veterano M member. It was at DVI that he raised his hand and sponsored the largest concentration of new young Mexican Mafia recruits brought into the Clica at one time. All were in their early 20s, and we affectionately referred to them as the Young Guns. All 11 of them are shown here, beginning with Mo Farrell from Eloyo Maravilla. Chavo Perez and Pata Garcia were Richie's homies from Bakersfield. Güero Shai from Artesia, Big Keto from Fresno, Chapo Amaro from Chiques, Baby Boy Resendez and Dagwood Vasquez from 155th, Stony from San Pedro, Romy from San Fernando, and Little Artie Duran from Barrio Nuevo. This mass recruitment is a tribute to Richie and demonstrates the respect the Eme had for him and his ability to evaluate talent. We called it Eme Material. 7 new recruits from LA, 2 from Bakersfield, 1 from Oxnard, and 1 from Fresno. Like I always say, the Mexican Mafia is an equal opportunity employer and an equal opportunity exploiter. As many of the Eme dudes began to serve long-term segregation confinement time, it would later be officially known as SHU or SHU units, the abbreviation for segregation housing units. Many of us with time on our hands would self-educate, and some began to read up on their Mexican history. Several of the Eme Carnales adopted ancient Indian names. Richie's handle was Tupac Amaru, and there was a unique history behind these ancient Indian gods. Keto was Quetzalcoatl, an Aztec god. And okay, so I cheated and had to Google that one. Conejo was Tochin. Whatever significance or history, I have no idea. As a believer in Christ, I'm sure for Conejo that name is long gone, since Christians have nothing to do with false idols. Amen. Most of us, myself included, consider ourselves contemporary gangsters, and we didn't have time for such nonsense. But Richie was proud of his Inca-rooted moniker and enjoyed being addressed as Tupac Amaru, or simply Tupac. So now you guys know the fact. Tupac does predate the rapper Tupac Shakur, who was born in 1971, 14 years after Richie Ruiz was made. Richie was head over heels in love with one of Cheyenne's sisters, and I don't remember which. Cheyenne had many beautiful sisters. One of them, Celia Cadena, is shown here with Eme member Rico Diaz from Eloyo Maravilla. There was Lucy, Lupe, Marica, and others. Marica is the sister whose home we used as a staging residence when Sailor and I traveled to Bakersfield to perform an act of revenge in the name of Cheyenne Cadena, their brother. I still get chills remembering Marica crying and me telling her we were there to honor the memory of her brother. She probably thought we were going to the cemetery to place flowers on his grave. What we, of course, didn't tell her is that we were honoring her big brother by taking out someone for our clica in his name. Te manda saludos el Cheyenne. Cheyenne sends his regards. These were my parting words to the victim in question. Not a very good memory, I might add. So this is Richie holding a puppy and visiting Cheyenne's grave sometime in the mid-1970s. Richie would serve about 15 years for the 1959 homicide, and I believe he paroled sometime in 1975 or so. For several years, I know he was living in Northern California near Modesto, where he was dealing dope and frustrating the SSU. The SSU is a Special Services Unit, an investigative group of special agents employed by the California Department of Corrections, who specialize in making the lives of paroled prison gang members very miserable. Richie apparently owned or rented a house situated on top of a steep hill. He possessed a high-powered telescope from where he could see anyone coming for many miles around him. Safe to say, no one was going to get the jump on him. Richie is shown here with some of us at a 1977 Mexican Mafia baptism in Visalia, where Tati and Victorio had set up shop in Northern Territory. Remember guys, when these vatos go to Norteño turf to sell dope, they don't take out an ad in the Visalia Delta Times to announce the Blue Crew is in town. While the locals were stretching their red bandanas and set tripping, These dudes already had certain people installed who were moving the very dope many of the gang members were consuming. They just were not aware of who was supplying it. I know because I was one of the vatos supplying Tati and Victorio, and they tripled and quadrupled what they could sell it for in LA. In Bakersfield, we doubled or tripled what we would generate in Los Angeles. Northern California was a gold mine for the M back when I was active, and the embedded Mexican Mafia members were in heroin heaven in the Norte. Please forgive my voice today, but I believe the accumulation of snow has affected me with a small cold. Richie and Acha from San Francisco had been longtime M carnales and were very close at Folsom Prison. But bad blood would develop between the two, stemming from a personal issue that took place on the outside sometime in the mid-70s. Richie had apparently engaged in a heated argument with one of Acha's sister, we'll call her Sofia, as they drove on the interstate from LA to San Francisco. When the dispute escalated, halfway between the two big cities, Richie pulled over to the shoulder, ordered her out of the car, and left her right there, hundreds of miles from home. Sofia's story conflicted with Richie's. She insisted Richie had slapped her around, and Acha's mom, Mama Nelly, relayed this complaint to Acha. Because you could not raise a hand against a fellow member without sanction from the fellas, Acha became the main guy, together with Mama Nelly, lobbying to have Richie hit for this incident. Because this was a personal issue and nothing to do with M business, Acha's protest versus Richie was rejected. Unable to act on his own, Acha was content to wait for the narrative to change. Richie's violent reputation inside the California state youth and prison system earned him the ongoing respect and loyalty of his confederates, until one day he suffered an injury in a scuffle at Folsom against a rival African-American convict. After being struck on the head with a pipe, he spent some days in the prison hospital where he was observed, x-rayed, then cleared and released to the Folsom prison yard. As a result of his head injury, his demeanor became somewhat altered. His speech was loud. Not the soft-spoken yet deadly Richie everyone knew and loved so well. Seizing upon this opportunity, Acha was all over it. The Mexican mob guys got together on the yard to discuss Richie's future, and they determined his diminished mental capacity constituted a potential detriment to La M. A vote was taken, the hit on Richie was approved, and Acha gave the assignment to Spider from Eloyo Maravilla, who was close to Richie. Spider confronted the man who had served La M so faithfully for over 2 decades on the Folsom prison yard, and Richie instinctively saw the hit coming. When Spider stepped up, another inmate simultaneously called out to Richie, an old ruse used on many occasions to distract an intended target. Spider produced his prison shank and made that move, but Richie saw it coming, pivoted, and delivered a rapid-fire 3-punch combination that caught Spider by surprise, knocking him to the ground. The shank that was supposed to terminate Richie's membership clattered onto the asphalt. The loud boom from a prison guard's rifle, the customary warning shot, was heard, whistles sounded, and prison guards quickly responded to the scene to gaffle up the two combatants. Richie and Spider were now in handcuffs, heading to the lockup unit, and Richie called out to Spider, "You tell the carnales next time don't send a boy to do a man's job." Richie Ruiz left the M the same way he came in, swinging from the shoulders. He was one of the lucky ones. Richie was super angry at this betrayal, but refused to talk to any of the Folsom gang investigators. He instead requested to speak only to Bill Hankins, the San Quentin gang sergeant he remembered from the old days. Sergeant Hankins was no longer a uniformed correctional officer. He was now an SSU special agent based in San Francisco and still employed by the Department of Corrections. Richie debriefed, and I still remember the day he was transported to Tehachapi in 1980. I was one of 13 convicts housed in the special unit of former prison gang members. There were 3 Aryan Brotherhood dropouts, 1 ex-BGF, 5 former NF members, and with Richie's arrival, 4 of us who once belonged to La M. Richie stood butt naked. They instructed him to turn around, bend over, spread his cheeks, and cough. My timing was perfect, and I let out a "Ugh!" Richie stood up straight, demanding, "Who's that?" I laughed and identified myself. Richie loosened up, smiled, and that was his welcome to the high-power protective custody tier at CCI Tehachapi. Sailor and I, along with the rest of the singing mobsters, assisted Richie, a.k.a. the original Tupac, in his transition from a life of darkness to the light. Some years later, Richie was released from prison and died a natural death on the outside. I was told his lifetime abuse of heroin caught up to him and took out his liver. I could talk about Richie all day long, but my jaws need to rest. Rest in peace, Richie. God bless you.